So thanks for having me and this opportunity to talk about HEMS dispatch. So I use the term HEMS dispatch, but what I really mean is critical care resources and what that looks like wherever you are. And that's quite interchangeable. So whenever I say HEMS dispatch or critical care, I'm basically meaning the same thing. I've got no conflicts of interest other than I obviously work on HEMS and I go to these jobs, but I don't currently work in dispatch. But I'm not sponsored by anyone. But if you would like to sponsor me, I am open to bribes. So the problem I think we kind of got is that there's no standardization of what each HEMS service does and what each ambulance service does. And you'll notice this talk isn't about what makes an excellent dispatch system. And that's because I think we've kind of yet to define what good is nationally. So I'm going to talk about what I think is good. And I'm open to commentary and your opinions and what you think we should do differently. But I've worked in a number of services in the UK and internationally, and I've worked in ESC and on the road. So this is kind of where a lot of this is formed from and from a lot of the research as well. Before I sort of go into HEMS, I think there's something that's worth mentioning, and that's if you haven't sat in an emergency operations centre and listened to 999 calls, go do it, because that's probably the most interesting thing you'll ever do in the ambulance service in terms of understanding how the process works. And it's the hardest job in the ambulance service. They literally will have calls 200 an hour coming in, and it's constant work. And they're dealing with people who are rude and abusive sometimes, and they're just trying to get them the right help. So definitely, if you haven't done that, I recommend that's the best place to go for an observation. Don't try and come out on HEMS, go there and you'll learn a lot more about how the job works. So why this talk? So yeah, I think there's this national problem with HEMS where services are working in isolation and improving things, but not really sharing it as wide. And I think there's some disparity there. And while it's like nationally agreed about what makes a category 2 call and the response times are agreed with that, and which triage call you use, whether that's pathways or MPDS, it's not really the same when it comes to HEMS. So we could really just agree on some dispatch codes and send HEMS to them, I guess, and then we don't have to have this talk and we don't need to do any research. The problem there is that we don't dispatch on response codes in HEMS, we dispatch on an intervention that we're likely to perform. So this is kind of how it looks in the control room. There's no big map. There's a list of jobs like this, and you probably could look at that and see some really obvious ones that we'd want to go to. So the top one there, a cardiac arrest for someone found in the garage who's 16. I think we could all easily say we probably want to send HEMS to that. This one having a seizure and it says they're possibly pregnant, probably want to send them to that. But there's jobs that I purposely wrote in there which HEMS have gone to from those disposition codes, which you wouldn't immediately pick up. And they're the ones that really are the skill about and why you need dedicated dispatch and why we should look into the data more. But there's 4 main things I think of why this is important, and that's a clinical reason, environmental, ethical and moral, and legal reasons. So clinically, we don't really have many definitions about what makes a good dispatch. So NICE recommend that we should perform an RSI, so putting someone to sleep within 45 minutes of a 999 call. Most services don't achieve that routinely. And there's a variety of factors for that. You know, it can take 5 minutes to identify the call. It can take 4 minutes or 5 minutes just to do the checks in the aircraft before we take off. And then we might fly 10, 20 minutes. And we've got to land, and then we've got to assess the patient, and we've got to get the kit done. So 45 minutes is quite difficult to achieve. And then if you think of performing a thoracotomy, we want to do that within 5 minutes of someone arresting, really, or a sort of hysterotomy. So if someone's pregnant, getting baby out, that needs to be within 4 minutes of arrest. But I've just said it takes us 4 or 5 minutes to do the check. So there's a challenge really of these. And these aren't really evidence-based in a way. There are a lot of expert opinion. And the ones which are evidence-based, the 5 minutes of arrest for a thoracotomy or an RH, that's like impossible to achieve, isn't it? So we're going to have to identify this patient kind of before they arrest to give us some time. So they're quite difficult in the clinical reasons to achieve that. So we need to do a lot of work on to achieve those, but also nationally to define what we think they are, because they're not really, like I say, evidence-based, and no service is really meeting that. So how can we improve that? I also spoke about about environmental reasons. So average flight, we probably fill it with about 150 litres of fuel. that's probably most people's car for a month. So if you think of that on every job, we have a massive impact on the environment. At work, we've got all these great bins to recycle, and often I'll put like my packaging in it, and I think, oh, I've just been out to 4 jobs today that I actually didn't see a patient in because we got stood down. Is me recycling really going to make a difference? So we need to have a better look at that as well to try and not have as many flights taking place, so that we don't burn as much fuel and we have a better impact on the environment, because helicopters aren't green. We're not going to get an electric one at any time soon. We can't put solar panels on it to make it any better. They're inherently not great for the environment. So we need to have a better look at that. And I'd recommend going and read this commentary that is open access. You can have a look by Eval, who works at KSS. And I think it really gives you an impact, an idea of the impact that we have on the environment, and something that we should really strive to improve. This next reason is probably the most important in a way, I think, probably up there with the clinical reasons. So we're a charity here at Midlands Air Ambulance, as of all the other air ambulances. And people go rock climbing, they run marathons, they raise money for us. And this picture you can see on the screen here is a hair salon, Blaze Hair, in the Midlands. After the death of one of their colleagues, Kerry, they started fundraising for us. And they've done loads of fundraising events. This is one at JD Gym that they did. And they've raised about £8,000 when I did this talk originally, but that money's gone up since. And they tirelessly do this so that we can go and help people. So we need to make sure that we're spending the money wisely, because each mission costs about £3,000. And I suspect that's going to go up in the next few years. So people have to fundraise more, but then money's tighter. So we're going to need more people to fundraise for us. Now, this is a huge amount of their time, and they're giving that up to help us get to patients. So we need to make sure that we're spending that money wisely and that we're getting to the right patients. Because if we were just flying around all day, we'd get to patients really quick, wouldn't we? But we'd go to the inappropriate ones, but we'd spend a huge amount of money. The service on the aircraft, if not many people know this, but they only have so many hours before they need certain things checked. And aviation is very expensive and medicine's very expensive, and we've combined the two. So, this is not a cheap operation. Like I say, £3,000 per mission. Compare that to our car costs, which is about £400 when we go on the car. It's a huge, huge cost. So we have a real responsibility to the people who fundraise in our community to make sure that we're getting to the right people. There's also a legal reason. Now, this document you'll see is from 2013, so it's quite old, but there's not really been much produced since about this. And I'll show you this next slide. But basically, there's a concern in a way, and this has never happened yet. And I don't think it's likely, but I think we need to consider the legal implications if this did happen. So the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act came into force. This basically means that organisations can be held responsible for gross negligence. So the way I kind of describe this is that if there was a patient who would benefit from our service and we didn't identify that and we didn't go to that, there could be legal implications for the organisations and the people who run those organisations as well. Now, I don't think this, like I say, this is likely to happen, but I think we need to consider this, that there could be a massive impact if this does happen. Like I said, we're a charity, so the legal cost of someone taking like a lawsuit against us could have quite a big impact onto that. Because we basically would have to fundraise to pay for that, because even if we had it on insurance, we've got to then fundraise to pay for the insurance. So this is a huge thing. It's never happened yet. I don't hope it happens, but I think we need to remember this when we're looking at dispatch, on how to make sure we meet sort of the legal requirement as well. Because there's nothing in law from sort of the NHS or the Healthcare Act which says that we have to respond, but there is in the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act. So I think that's worth considering as well. So you've probably all seen this. So this is a really well publicized image, and it basically goes through the stages of the chain of survival and how they're all interlinked. Now, I think most people would think that HEMS comes in to provide the post-ROS care. Often we sometimes get to patients first, and we've had cases where we've been first on scene and have got the first shock in, but that's quite rare in most services. But that's mostly what HEMS bring, is quite a lot in post-resuscitation care. However, To identify those post-resuscitation care patients, you need to identify them earlier, which is where this comes in. And I think a lot of people fail to understand this and fail to um, consider this in that, the early recognition. So just a bit bigger, in case people don't understand, but that early recognition is key. And that's really challenging in the control room because you've got all those jobs coming in and you're trying to work out which one do I send the team to. Because of the 7,000 calls which come into an emergency control room, HEMS are probably going to 20 or 30 of those. So you're looking for these needle in haystacks. And sometimes there's no needles there and you'll still have to look. And sometimes there's lots of needles there and you have to decide which ones that you're going to. So that's a challenge. So some of you will recognize these screenshots from well-known, really reputable source, Wikipedia. And what this is how the military score intelligence. We always love to compare it to the military. Whenever someone mentions a tourniquet, they always seem to mention it came from the military and tell me all that, which is great. So I wondered what we can learn from the military and what is information and what is intelligence and the difference. So you'll see there's a table graded A to F and there's one 1 to 6. And basically, what this does is it gives you a score by looking at it and assessing where you feel that the information and the reliability of that information comes in. Now, if you've been to an emergency call, an ambulance, you probably feel that most of them come in at that F6 rating. So real, you read the jobs and then you get there and you're like, what's going on here? They're not even injured like that. This happened weeks ago or things like that. So you probably have that frustration and understand how difficult that information coming through is. Now, if you think most people when they ring 999, I think the last time I looked, on average, you ring once every 18 years. So it's not too common. And if you performed a task once every 18 years, you probably wouldn't really know what you're doing the first time. And so you've got to remember that information we get is unreliable in the sense that people are just wanting help and they don't know what we're going to be asking. And then we guide them through this script of all these different questions. So the challenge here is how do we improve that rating from what I'm sure probably most of you agree is that F6 rating to that A1 top line. It tells us exactly what we want to know and is accurate and correct. So what I think we need to do is try and put time and space between the decisions of sending and that information. So if we had it like this, so someone got stabbed and we waited for that A1 information, which is probably coming from an ambulance crew who are experienced in it and can give a good report. So we have a stabbing, we wait for the crew to get there, we get an update, yes, you need it, and we dispatch. We're going to be too late. We're going to miss a huge amount of patients from that, and they're going to come to harm, and they're just going to turn up to dead people, and we're not going to be able to do it. So with that stabbing, what we need to do is what I like to call early interrogation, and I'll come on to the different types of that in a bit. We need to accept that we're going to have a higher stand down rate. So there'll be a lot of these patients that we get to who were not required on because that information wasn't A1, it wasn't the best information we had, but it wasn't quite F6. We've worked out where it's more accurate. And then we'll probably perform a higher level of interventions on these patients, and then we'll have more survivors in theory. So if we do that out for, say, a road traffic collision, so road traffic collisions, predominantly when you look at the CAD, they sit like a category 3 sometimes, with no real injuries described. People are alert, and they can be quite sick, and there's a lot of risk in those. So what we need for those is real early interrogation, early recognition. Now, it can be quite difficult to do that. So there's this thing called cold interrogation and hot interrogation that I'll come on to. But there's also a thing in there called Good SAM. And that's basically where you can video call a scene so you can see what's going on. And I think that should be utilised a lot on these. That'll allow us to look at a scene and look at what's going on because often with road traffic collisions, you'll get 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 999 calls, all telling you very little information other than there's been a crash and there's people injured. And that's it. And you're like, well, what were their injuries? Oh, I don't know. I was just on the bus and I saw it happen. So like we need to get better at that and work out who can provide us the best information and how we can get that information out. And then from that, we'll again not do a thoracotomy on these patients, but maybe perform an RSI much within that 45-minute window. And then finally, I think the same with cardiac arrest. So you probably need an immediate dispatch criteria for these. These are quite difficult to get much information from because we ask the call taker to do something actively, don't we? We get them to do chest compressions or we get them to go do an AED. So we need to work out, do we have a immediate dispatch criteria for that? And then we need early update from crews. I think that we ask crews too much sometimes. So I'm sure you've probably had this where you got to a job and then you say, oh yeah, it's a confirmed arrest, or you know that HEMS are coming, and then someone radios you and they ask you a question, and you're like, yeah, and then they ask you another question, and you're like, I'm trying to run an ALS here, trying to do the interventions which are needed to save this patient's life, but you're asking me all these questions and getting in the way. And I used to say to some of my colleagues, like, if you send the if the crew get there and they don't answer the radio on a cardiac arrest, it's probably because they're very busy, and that's probably a high sign that you should send the team. Because normally, if you get there and you're not needed and your radio goes, you can answer quite quickly and say, well, stand everyone down, we don't need everyone. So if people answer the radio after one attempt, I tend to say don't bother them again because they're busy and working. And I think the information we get from crews, we need to refine and have a bit of a standardized approach and do some research in this because often I'll get told what the patient's end tidal is, I'll get told what size their ideal is or what the blood sugars are. And frankly, I don't really care about a lot of this information because it's probably going to get repeated again once I get on scene. And often I found it's miscommunicated. So I get told that their BM's 5, but actually it's not, it's 55 or, things like that where the accuracy of that information getting passed along isn't always there. So I think there's probably one thing that I need to know which will help send a team, and that's what the initial rhythm is. So if you get there in asystole, probably less likely to send a team because there's less likely of a ROSC and there's less likely of an outcome. I think if they're in a shockable rhythm, that probably should be almost an immediate dispatch for most teams. And that should really help make the decision, especially if you've got 2 or 3 arrests going on, which can be quite common, and you're trying to work out who do I send the team to, who's most likely to have a benefit. So I think that's easier because it's very quick. They're in VF. I know they're in cardiac arrest because they're in VF, and you're not in VF unless you're in cardiac arrest. So you get that information, and you can work out from there, and you're not bothering the crews with lots of information about what's going on. I'm not saying don't give another report after. It's always good to have that, but focus on treating that patient, which I think is the useful bit. So I think that's it. And then yeah, some immediate dispatch criteria. So in EAAA, they did some work on this actually. Just going to go next slide. Is that? Okay, wasn't working there. So yeah, EAAA did some work on this. Now, I would be interested to know how many services have actually reviewed their data and assessed to see if this is useful for their organisations. So what EAAA did, it was in the east of England, and they looked at lots of dispatches that they went to. So when you ring for 999, you basically, it depends what's wrong with you, you get a code. So 09 is cardiac arrest, and DX12 is like a 111 transfer. So that's, lots of people know that one. So you'll get given a code, and then it individually breaks down the code more and more to a very specific thing. For example, unconscious, not breathing, trapped, and things like that. So you can really work out what's going on. And then from that, they looked at these 9 golden codes, as they've called them. So 9 codes in the triage system, which basically showed a high intervention rate of HEMS attending. So not just a team getting to it, but to do an intervention on scene, which is ultimately often a surrogate for a good dispatch. So the team get there and perform an intervention, that was good. So I think this is really an interesting paper because it cuts down that time, because if you say, well, as soon as it hits this, which often will happen in around about 3 minutes of a 999 call, you can know whether to send the team, and it can automatically do that. It could pop up and say, there's this job, you should send the team, or it could, we have a klaxon here. It could automatically do the klaxon and send me to the aircraft, starting up. So we can do a bit more integration and then stand us down maybe before we even took off. But from there, we could say 4 minutes by having that really quick and early system. So I think that's a really useful bit of research which has happened, and it probably should happen to all services. And I think it's a great question to ask your medical directors if you want. Has your organisation looked into this to see if it can reduce the dispatch time, or look to see what their golden codes might be where there's a high intervention rate? So a much younger looking Liam here. So there's lots of technology out there which allows you to see what's going on or hear. Because if you're just sat reading a screen, you don't get much information, and obviously there's a bit of a lag to that, and there's a bias to that information about what's just been listened to and how that's been interpreted. So a classic one from this is when you have a cardiac arrest and you say, did this happen just now? And lots of people say yes to that. And what they interpret that question, I feel, is that it's happened just now to them. So they've walked in and they've found someone dead. And they've gone, oh, it's just happened now because I've just come home from Tesco and yeah, I found them dead. But actually, that person arrested 3, 4 hours ago. And then I'll get sent because it's a witnessed arrest. And then we'll think there's a high chance here when you turn up or you get stood down because actually it's happened a long time ago. Whereas if you listen to that call, you could hear the person maybe say, well, I was out shopping at Tesco, I came home and I found him. And that can change sort of the difference between that. Not all services can listen into 999 calls. And I think that that should be sort of a national standard, really, that everyone has that tool, because it comes on to what I was saying about hot and cold interrogation earlier. So if you're not aware, hot interrogation is basically where there's someone in the control room who actively asks the question, and they could type a note into the CAD and get the call taker to ask that question, or they could physically ask on the phone as well. And you have two people in the control room on that line asking them very specific questions, like, when you say they're stabbed in the chest, like, is it right next to the nipple or is it a bit more towards their belly button? Because some people don't know where the chest starts. So you could get more information out like that quite specifically. And cold interrogation is where you passively listen and don't ask any questions, and the person on the phone to 999 wouldn't know that you're there listening in. So that's the difference between hot and cold interrogation. It doesn't happen everywhere though. So I think it's a great tool, and I think it should be everywhere. There's not much research on it. I know a lot of people have considered some research, they've implemented it, and when actually it works for us, so we're not going to do the work, we're just going to keep it, which is a bit of a downside because then other services might not do it. Um, so there's also a thing called Good Sam that I mentioned, which basically, the way I describe this to my mum is like, the people in the control room can FaceTime you, and you can't see them, but they can see what your phone sees, and they can say move it left or right and things like that. And this is a really great tool, and there's a really good talk on this by Mark, who's one of the doctors who helped invent it. And I'd really encourage you, if there's ever an opportunity to go to a talk about the Good Sam tool or look on my YouTube videos, watch them because it's amazing. And some of the videos they show at talks is phenomenal. So they showed a video in America where they're legally allowed to record the footage. We don't do that in the UK, but they were performing CPR on a pediatric patient, and it was ineffective CPR that they perform in. They good Sam it, they recognise it's ineffective, and they talk them through how to physically do it. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's been to a 999 call where there's been CPR instructions given, and they're doing exactly what the person's saying on their phone, but they're interpreting it wrong. So, I went to someone who was doing a push on every 4 counts that the person was doing, whereas you're meant to do on every one. And these people are not stupid. They've done first aid courses. They've done all this. It's just the first time they're performing it. It's on their family or friend, and they're just trying to do their best. And they just need some coaching. And that's our job, where we can use technology to make that better. So I think this should be in every service personally. Again, it's not, but I think it has a huge benefit to that. There's some ethical questions which can be asked, and there's some papers on that I'd encourage you to read. But I truly believe that this is the future, and probably an aspect of the initial 999 calls could be triaged with this as well. So I think that's where it's really good. I remember listening to a 999 call once where the gentleman said, they asked, are you alert? And he said to his friend, oh, are you alert? And he said, oh, I don't know. And he said, oh, are they conscious? And he said, are you conscious? I just sat there thinking, well, I can hear him talking, so he's obviously conscious. But they've got to follow exactly what's said by the person on the phone, so that can make it really, really difficult to do. And the whole, is a patient alert? Even sometimes as a clinician, I don't know what that means, because I can go into the crew room at 3 in the morning, and there's lots of people who don't look very alert, but they don't need an ambulance, do they? So that expectation we have of the public of understanding is sometimes a bit too high, I feel, and we need to be the experts in that and support them so that they can help us. So I'm going to do a little case study now. So you can put in the chat what you do, or give a reaction, any reaction you want. you're in the control room, you've got a helicopter descend, you can have a doctor, a paramedic, whatever you want on it. You can be wherever you want in the region. But this is a 40-year-old male who's at home and their partner heard a thud, who went upstairs and they found the male unresponsive. And the notes that you can see says unconscious, breathing, moving arms slightly. And then your nearest DCA, so nearest ambulance, is 15 minutes away, and HEMS are 15 minutes away by air as well. So my question is, who's sending the team to this job? I'll give you a few minutes to type in the chat who would send. So we've got someone here, it looks like a C3, we've got a few reactions yet. So yeah, so both will go, yeah, so I feel like the DCL will go either way. Any other answers? So so one question, call interrogation, can you hear the patient? So let's say, for purpose of this, you can't hear anything. And yeah, review the history and things like that. I think it's really good to do. Yeah, look to see. And then what else? CFRs, yeah. So CFRs, yeah, absolute godsend. Most of the ROSC I go to have got a CFR on scene who's got the ROSC. And they are worth their weight in gold. And then maybe wait for crew report, wait for breathing count, yeah. Arms to quarter, disable. You literally, all you've got is the notes in the CAD, so breathing arms from there. So yeah, I'd be surprised if HEMS rocked up to that without me requesting them. Yeah, I can see why. Yeah. Okay, so pull the call back if you see any of the call yet. So really good there. So like lots of different ways. So basically, I think some people would send and some people would want more information, and they do either or. Okay. So a bit of a trick, to be honest. This question isn't, there's no right or wrong answer here in a way, but this is about one real important thing I think that we need to consider in dispatch, and that's about culture. My colleague who told me this is on the call, I've noticed. So this will be interesting after. But basically, this is about the culture of a desk and how we can support the people in the control room who are making these decisions, because they are making hundreds of decisions every hour, trying to work out who do I send to, what more do I need to know? Should I wait for an update? Oh, I've got an update about that job that I looked at 20 minutes ago and I looked at this. So there's a lot about that. So my colleague listened to that job, which I appreciate I didn't really say you could, but they listened to that and they said something wasn't right and they sent the team. And the team got there and they said they phoned the desk and they asked for a conference call with the senior on call, which is a very common thing we have in HEMS, as the patient was in cardiac arrest and they wanted to put the patient down a really specific pathway, which they can access. And they said to me, I wasn't worried about them calling to joke about the dispatch, that they just sent them to someone who's tripped over and has actually had a brief episode of unconsciousness and is fine. He said, I just had this sense when I was listening in that something wasn't right. I was comfortable with being wrong and supported in my decision making by my team. I think that's really key here, because they thought we were ringing to have a joke and say, why have you sent us this load of tosh? Like, come on, this is not what we're here for. We're here for those Gucci jobs. But actually, they were ringing because the patient was really sick and it was a really good dispatch and it was recognised early and it was experience and that gut feeling. But most importantly, in my mind, there was that acceptance that if they got it wrong, the team wasn't going to berate them. They felt supported to make these decisions. And I think that's really key, and has a big impact in how you can support people in control room, because it is a hard job sitting on the desk looking at all these jobs while the crews are on base doing sims, watching Netflix. It's a really difficult job and there's lots of decision making which happens, and it's easy to find the easy jobs. If we go back to that slide where I had all the different codes, there's a really easy one to pick out there, but this one wasn't one of those obvious ones. So that support and that culture is really key, and I think that we really need to do that as clinicians to support them. Which brings me on to a next point, which I often hear people say, where there'll be a slow dispatch and they don't report it, or they don't work out how we can be better. And this is a balance of not berating the people on the desk for missing a job, because ultimately you will miss jobs. We don't have all that information, and the information we do have is often sometimes quite poor. So you will have slow dispatch sometimes, and we should accept that, but we need to learn from each one to work out how we can get better. So we need to have a culture as well, which allows us to report them so that we learn from it. It's not a bad thing, and it's just about how we learn from it. The same as if something happened with a patient which we didn't expect or we didn't want, we would report that and learn from it. We have good governance for that. And I think sometimes there's not a great crossover of a governance of dispatch and clinical care, and we tend to forget that first bit which happens. So that's quite key. So when you're on an ambulance, you can kind of do what you want in a way, because there's no one watching you. I can do my paperwork when I want, I can cannulate when I want, I've got quite a lot of control over that environment. I can move a patient from their house and do it in the ambulance, or I can do quite a lot. In control rooms, like every keystroke is recorded. So if you type something, it was recorded. If you don't move your mouse, that's recorded. If you go for a toilet break and do that quite a lot, that's recorded. So there's so much data in a control room that we can tap into and learn from. So I think every service should have a log of the jobs that they've dispatched on and the ones that they've considered dispatched on. And team jobs where they were just sent, but the team were busy. There should be dispatch decisions about why they sent on that. There should be records of stand down rates and the reason crews requesting. All this information is already logged in control rooms in some way or form. We don't collate that into good enough data so that we can share that and learn from it. I think that's where we need to be better, because we have that data already. And in research, if you look at the Paramedic 2 trial or the Airways 2 trial, they're such difficult trials to do because you're doing it in an ambulance service where it's pre-hospital care, and we don't have that level of detail. But we absolutely have that in the control room. So there's no reason that we can't do that level of research, because it's available. We're in a very, very controlled environment. So we can really look into that and learn from it. And I think that we need to do that. And we need to look for those jobs that we missed through that data. So you've heard me talk for a fair bit about my opinions and things like that, and you'll notice that this talk hasn't told you whether you should have a paramedic or a non-clinical dispatcher in the control room, whether it should be a CCP or a paramedic, or when you should do a crew request or how your crew request should work, because there's lots of service-specific things which will work for that service, and there's lots of different things that HEMS teams go to that other services don't go to. So, for example, in my area, we do a lot of stroke transfers direct to thrombectomy. Not every service does that. So, yeah, how do you make that standard? It's probably not going to work. But what there isn't at the minute is like an effective guideline for that, or nationalised standards. And I think we all need to get together, HEMS and ambulance services, and with frontline clinicians as well, about how we can improve that service and how we can make it better. Because I think there's lots of learning happening in different organisations which need to be shared better, and we can really learn amongst that. We're not really quite doing that at the minute, so I think that's a real big way that we need to go. This talk I gave before, it's like, I don't know if they listened to my talk, but EHAT have kind of answered my dream in a way, and they've organised this, which is National Critical Care Dispatch Symposium. So 2 days it's going to be where we can discuss that. If I was you and you work in service, because this will be quite HEMS based and it won't be open to a huge amount just because of their capacity. If I was a paramedic on this call, or a nurse in a hospital, or in a control room, I would start trying to keep a bit of a log about things which frustrate me and writing this down, because I reckon from this, there will be some surveys to crews and a way to try and improve this. But what we really need from that is people who are frontline facing with things that they find work well and things that they like to see. So we really need that, because it's a real team effort here. If we go back to that chain of survival, but like where it was that early recognition and early CPR, all that. This is still a chain of patient care, and there's lots of different people involved in this, and lots of people involved in getting these teams to people. So I think that we really need to. I'd recommend that you submit any answers to surveys which come out or things like that, or get involved with that, and feedback to crews and your services. I know at my service, we really open if a crew said, "Look, I asked for you and you didn't come, or I don't know if you can go to that." certainly email them or speak to the crews or the desks, and they'll be more than happy to provide advice and guidance from that, and take on feedback of things, jobs that we might have missed. 'Cause I think we're definitely about learning culture. We go back to my previous slides as well. So there's a bit opportunity for questions at the end, but that's basically a summary of my talk. So I hope it's interesting and useful. But yeah, feel free to ask any difficult questions or things. And if I don't know the answer, I will either say or I'll make it up and pretend that I do know. But just before I do as well, Anna, this is obviously your last day here, so thank you for helping all these. It's really appreciated. And you don't see this, but she basically talks me through like an idiot on how to do this and how to go through all the slides and things. And I think the tech went okay, and that's firmly down to you and not me there. So thank you for your help with that.
Oh, no, you're most welcome. It went perfectly, so you've absolutely nothing to worry about there. However, I think I've done my. No, we're all good. Guys, we've not had a tech hiccup like normal. There it is straight away, the QR code and the Q&A. So, end on a high, as you would. So now is the chance to get your questions in. Liam, thank you for such an insightful, and I think food for thought. I think definitely food for thought of where we can be best placed within this world, where we can best place our resources and our people and our HEMS uh, helicopter. I was going to call them drivers then. Pilots, that's the word I was looking
Pilots,
for.
yeah.
Pilots as well. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we have had some talks, and I do apologise if I suddenly disappear on the screen and then reappear because there are things coming in. There we are. Just getting the chat up as well because I can see that some people have popped some things into the chat. So, Liam, if you're ready for some questions,
Yeah.
the first one came in a little bit earlier into the talk, but I think it's important anyway. So, Paul Holmes has asked, non-clinical dispatcher versus a clinical dispatcher. What are your thoughts? Slightly controversial, so.
Yeah. Okay, so Uh, the answer that I think, which is probably not popular, is actually I think you need both. I think if you look at call volumes coming in, you know, years ago we said 5,000 calls a busy day in London. That's now at 7,000. In the Midlands, we've seen high increases as well. And the easy jobs are easy to spot. So what I think you need is both, so that you can free up one person to look for those difficult to spot jobs and like crew advice and working out which ones we're going to miss. And then the dispatcher can help with things like the radio comms and the almost spotting like the easier ones and working as a team. And I think that's how it should work. That's not cheap because I think for like a band 7 CCP, which is probably what most are paid, it's about 500,000 a year for a full-time person, plus another dispatcher as a non-clinical. So you're talking a lot of money to do that, but it's about getting that right service. So I think you need both as the answer there, and they should work together as a team. There's probably another caveat to that there should be, in my opinion, probably a national course or a national training program for non-clinical dispatchers to do, which CCPs should do as well, probably. But just to learn a lot of the things that we're learning of the services about listening to calls and which one we should send into or what's important to know, and even terminology and things like that is probably an element of that. So if we're going to do that, what education we provide people is key as well within that.
No, I agree. And I think I think if you're going to get someone who's, you know, like me, who's non-clinical. So someone like me, I think it's a common sense thing as well. It's just using that common sense of, do they have the common sense? Do they have that ability to just see what's most important versus having that clinical person in the rear going, okay, but what about this? And then that
Yeah.
person going, but what about this? So it's kind of that balance,
Yeah,
which I
massively.
think,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
that balance is key. And I think that if you're just because you're in the control room and you're non-clinical, you should come out on shift with a team and you'll learn quite a lot. Unfortunately, like our aviation provider, Babcock, don't think that's legal. Other services do, and there's a lot about who can come on the aircraft because of a CAA. But I absolutely think that is important because you're part of a team and part of that patient journey, and part of that chain of survival. So
Mhm.
yes, you should do that and learn from it and see what we go to and understand, oh, I can see why I probably shouldn't have sent to that, or this is why this is a good job. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right, come on, guys. This is my last webinar. I can see that there's 80 of you online. You've got to have more than one question. Now is the time. If hopefully you're typing away and getting some in, but let's get some questions in. Let's end this on a big question night. Or if you've not, I'm just going to say it's an absolute compliment to you, Liam, because you've just given everyone going, Oh, actually, yeah. I've I've nothing to add to that.
Probably not
So
that, yeah.
no, it genuinely is. You'll find it is. So when there's no questions in, it's because generally the speaker's done such a job that I've got emails and I can see the emails coming in already saying thank you so much. So
They're
generally,
good.
it's a compliment to the speaker. So it is compliments to you, Chef, for doing such a
Suppose
thorough
if,
talk that people don't feel the need to. But this is
yeah,
always the curse as well. I'm going to click on to the next slide. I'm going to leave this up for a few
um,
seconds so people have a chance to scan the QR code. As well as that, I'm also just going to go and find the QR code and then find the. There we go, straight away. I knew that would happen. I'm talking about leaving, and straight away a question comes in.
yeah.
So Luke has asked, who do you think should be responsible for creating a national HEMS dispatching course, and how can they make it happen?
Yeah. So Luke, I don't know your background, but I guess if anyone could really do that, anyone could go to a HEMS service and say, look, have you thought about this? And we at Mac have a really good innovation way to do it. And admittedly, I've not suggested this, but I'm talking to here saying we should have it. But I think anyone can do that. So if you work in control and you have that, that's great to do. And in my previous job, we had like a course that we did internally, but we didn't share that learning. You could email the College of Paramedics, you could email ACE and say, I think I've got this idea here, and create that. So I think, yeah, anyone can really do that. It's just about getting people in the room. I don't know if that's obviously this symposium with EHAT, but yeah, depending on your background, Luke, more than welcome to email EHAT and say, oh, I'm quite keen on this and I work in this area and I think I've got an idea for a course which could make this really good. So yeah, I think that responsibility, there's definitely responsibility of the charities
Mm,
to be involved in it and the ambulance services, 100%. But
yeah,
it's got to involve people who do the job, and feedback from crews and call takers and patients to help inform that course.
no, no, I agree. Yeah, no, brilliant. And yeah, I think did you share your emails, all, Liam?
Uh, I don't know if I did, but I think it was on one of my slides. But if not, I can pop it in the chat. If not,
Yeah,
I'll put it in now. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah,
you're more welcome to email me um, if you have thoughts, ideas, or if
yeah,
yeah,
there it is. Yeah, perfect. Okay, and as I predicted, questions have come in, so
but yeah,
hopefully this works. So Wendy's asked her, hello Wendy. So do you routinely, is apparently a tongue twister, do you routinely assist on non-traumatic cardiac arrest if initial rhythm is shockable, Lucas, IGEL, adrenaline, etc., can
yeah.
all be managed by paramedics instead?
Yeah, so in Midlands Air Ambulance, we go to quite a lot of cardiac arrest. So I think, was it 30% of our jobs in the last 2 years were cardiac arrest? So it's a huge amount in that. Uh, so yeah, paramedics, most cardiac arrests can absolutely manage that and don't need us. And I turn up often to well-led cardiac arrests where these patients have either ROSC before we got there or imminently about to ROSC. Um, that's not where we really come in for most of those patients. It's that post-ROSC phase where we can really offer a lot of support, but we need to go to more cardiac arrest to then get to that ROSC phase. So we often have that, and I'll turn up at these cardiac arrests and people are doing a great job, and I'll just kind of help and assist and offer my experience on how to run them, but not take over. Or try not to. Most people often will hand it over, but you try and hand it back because you want them to carry on and get the experience. So yeah, so we do see a lot. Some services don't go to medical cardiac arrest. We have other critical care teams who I'd include in this. It doesn't just have to be by a helicopter. It's a critical care team where we can have a big impact. Uh, so yeah, they can be routinely managed. We in the Midlands or in West Midlands, the paramedics can't remotely terminate. So in SWAS, for example, or when I worked in London, you could often meet people where you feel that resuscitation is not going to be successful. They're not within JLCAT guidelines to stop resuscitation. You don't feel it's in your interest to take them in hospital in cardiac arrest. So you could remotely call someone and discuss it and then terminate outside of those guidelines. That doesn't happen in the West Midlands, unfortunately. My personal opinion is that it should, because we would have people who would have more dignified deaths from that. But that's not done in the West Midlands. So we probably see a higher amount of that where we go to support to terminate resuscitation because the crew struggle to do what they think is right for the patient and that they know they want to stop, but the guidelines don't allow them to. So yeah.
Perfect. And I asked for questions, and here they come. So,
Yeah.
Andrew's asked, and hello, Andrew, as well. Do all HEMS groups across the UK network and share best practices? Which he kind of touched upon that there are differences, but is there
Yeah.
a sort of a synergy?
Yeah, so there's lots of groups from that which look at a variety of different things from education through to like the head injuries and things like that. So there's lots of these groups from that in a variety of different areas. There's nothing really specific on dispatch nationally. There's some things which touch on it, but there's no national guideline and there's no national definition of what does good look like for dispatch, and that's what I think we need.
Yeah, perfect. And our lovely, wonderful supporter Suzanne's asked, do you evaluate and review individual cases for opportunities for care improvement? How would you disseminate changes or improvements?
Yeah, so I can't speak for every service, but we basically the jobs which are done today, if I'm on shift tomorrow, we review all their jobs as a team. So we go through it and we will, yeah, look for improvements and things like that. And we might pick up on things like a slow dispatch or a long time to do an RSI and things like that. And we comment on that. That will be individually fed back to that person. It's learned within the team. And then we document a way that is then shared in wider learning with that. And then we take a portion of those jobs, which are then discussed at a governance day, sort of once a month they are. Um, so yeah, we get that as well. I think I've answered most of what you said on there. Let me just double check. So yeah, and that's how they're we disseminate that learning. So there's quite a lot. The area of improvement, I guess, in a way, is including the people on the desk, which we don't actively do. They'll come to our governance days, um, but we don't do that in the daily case reviews, which is probably a learning point to do. But the difficulty is they're still got to look at the CAD, and then they're trying to have a Teams meeting. So
Yeah.
it's that balance of getting that right.
Perfect. And George has asked, would you support a cardiac arrest team? So kind of going back to what we were talking about, would you support a cardiac arrest team like a dedicated DCA, dispatched solely to Cat ones only? This is something they have been talking about since they started with SWAS, but it's never been considered.
Yeah, so I know in SWAS they had things like the heart team who were going to like cardiac arrest within 15 minutes of Bristol. Um, so this has been trialed, but if you look at like what saves people in cardiac arrest, it's early CPR and early defibrillation, and
Yeah.
that's the key. And I think having available resources for that is probably the answer. Now, I would not be against, if you've got a stack of Cat 2s and you haven't got any resources to go to those Cat 2s, when how are you going to get to your Cat 1? And maybe we should protect resources to make sure we have appropriate cover in areas so we can get to a Cat 1. That's a balance, isn't it? Because we probably would never get to the Cat 2s and people would come to harm and then they'd wait and then they become a Cat 1 because they've had a STEMI and waited so long. So it's
Yeah.
a really difficult balance there, isn't it? And um, I thankfully don't really have to worry about that in my job, but it's a fine balance to get right. And you've got to remember that ambulance services are commissioned to hit a Cat 2 target, a Cat 1 target. So, you need to balance that. I think the answer really is, apps like Good Sam, where not just a video call and a scene, but it alerts people so they can get early CPR and get early defib. That's probably what's needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, rather than just ring fencing specific resources, I think that's quite useful.
Perfect. And Paul's asked, is your dispatch desk is your dispatch I can't say that word tonight.
Yeah.
So it's all about this as well. Is your dispatch desk in your EOC or remote, i.e., is it on base? And do you feel this positively or negatively impacts on your stand down rates and intervention rates?
Yeah, so in my service now, I have no view of a CAD. Don't know what's going on. Um, if I'm with a crew and I get a general broadcast for a Cat 1, I might hear that. But that is much of the knowledge I get. So I don't know if it's a busy day or a quiet day in the ambulance service. Unless I go to hospital and I'll see lots of vehicles outside, I'm like, oh. But even then, sometimes that doesn't tell me much. So yeah, I have no access. I don't think you should have access if you're on the clinical team, though. I think it causes issues where people then look if they're bored and try and find
Yeah.
jobs and question people. And again, it brings that culture thing in. And I've certainly seen that when this has happened in services and they'll say, oh, have you seen this job? And they're questioning why they've not been sent. But the dispatchers looked at that job 20 minutes ago, made a decision not to send, has more information than what's on the CAD, and then has looked at 30 other jobs since then. So it's that kind of questioning, which sometimes can be quite difficult, and isn't always well placed because you don't have all that information. So personally, I think we should be blinded and we don't know and we just get sent. And I try to have that on shift of blind faith, and I'll just go. That doesn't mean that some days I don't think I've not had a job today, and I've not even had a stand down. But I don't bring up and ask that. But sometimes you do think that in your mind. Whenever I get a stand down, if I have 5 stand downs in a day, I never moan because I think, well, at least they're looking for jobs. Like I know they're definitely looking and sending me. So that kind of reassures me. But I never question that. And I think you shouldn't. I think it's almost unprofessional. And you should be supporting that person to make their decisions.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And Paul kind of responded to that saying that
Yeah,
they tell the team never question the dispatcher as well. So you've
yeah.
just it's I think it's it's part of being a team, isn't it? It's having that faith in each other and that trust in each other to be able to do what's best and what's best for the patient at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why they should come out and shift with us and we should go in. I did that when I first started and I've met them on our governance days, but that having a cup of tea together on shift and bonding
Yeah.
that way has a lots about team working and is not just that remote voice on a radio that you've never seen.
No, exactly. And it's the same in anything you do with a team. You've got to be a team. And working anonymously is never going to get you anywhere, is it? So, no, completely agree. And no matter what facet of life you're looking in as well. Now, for the final question this evening, we are going anonymous and we're also
Okay.
talking about stand down, so very apt.
Yeah.
Crews are often keen to stand down hems down. Crews are often keen to stand hems down early for various reasons. Once dispatched, how do you ensure? I apologise, there is a train coming past my ear at the moment. Once dispatched, how do you ensure they stand down? The stand down is correct to avoid missing patients. I can only see one paper from 2012 on this, so that last part is just
Yeah.
there's
So
no sort of sites and sources on that.
no, that's fine. So I think I know the paper they're on about. So I think the first bit of it really is like you shouldn't be don't worry about standards down really quickly. I'd rather have a very informed decision and you're happy. And if that means we land and we get to you and you say, oh, sorry, you're not needed, that's fine. Like it doesn't really change much for me. We'll be available just as quick. We've landed, like there's risks to landing and things like that, but I'd rather that than get back to base, land, mid refuel and retest you. So yeah, don't worry. It's not a failure of a paramedic or anyone on an ambulance, or even if you're off duty, to have a HEMS team turn up and then not needed. I've definitely done that when I was a paramedic, where they turned up and said, "Oh, sorry guys, I probably don't actually need you." Absolutely fine. So we need to almost get rid of that culture that's a negative for them to turn up and not be needed. Um, and so I think that's kind of the main bit. The bit in how you do that in control is that we should, and this is where crews need to do that, is good clinical information. So
Hmm.
you might not know why the HEMS team is coming. So the classic is like asthmatic patients. We can do a lot more interventions for these patients than just some IM adrenaline and some salbutamol through a neb. We've got other drugs that we can give them. We have other ventilation methods. So that's quite a big package. But a lot of people sometimes think, mainly in our region, that we're just here for traumas. And I actually don't not a big fan of trauma. I'd rather get a medical cardiac arrest in a way. So yeah, we're there to give an intervention. To provide a clinical update is what I often say. So say what you've got, and then if you don't think we need it at the end of that, say I think you probably stand down, and they'll probably agree, and it's a bit of a joint decision. It's not them making the decision for you; it's you offering your recommendation in kind of an SBAR format. So there's that aspect to it, but give them that clinical information. And don't worry about that. Probably more about primary survey. I don't really if what my blood pressure is doesn't really sometimes tell as much. But if you say like, oh, they've got a good radial, there's not much blood loss. They're sat up talking to me. They're on their iPhone. I'm probably like, oh, okay. If you tell me, yeah, their blood pressure's 108/70, I'm like, well, what are they doing? Like, I want a bit more than that. So yeah, so good clinical information and a recommendation, and then the person back will say, oh, we probably come in for this or for that, and you can really do that, but don't rush to do it. That's probably the advice I'd say for that.
Perfect. A thorough answer for what I thought was going to be a simple question, but no, a very thorough answer, and I think and no, not in a bad way. I think it was worth the information to hear. Is absolutely. But that is, ending as the way we do, ending on an anonymous question. That is the final question for this evening. So the last thing that we've got to do, as always, is before we thank Liam, is just thank the other sponsors for trauma care, as well as Slater and Gordon. So first off, a huge thank you to our lovely friends over at QualSafe, Nigel, Toby, the rest of the gang over there, Rachel, everyone. Thank you so much for your support over the years. Obviously, you guys know that they are our first aid sponsors. They run the first aid stream. They helped us put together the Scottish Trauma Care Conference as well. They're incredible supporters of trauma care, and they deserve your support as well. So do scan the QR code that's on your screen. Go to qualsafe.org, find out all about the incredible first aid courses that they've got available. They're a lovely company as well, wonderful to deal with. So do find out more about them by scanning the QR code that's on your screen. And of course, our lovely friends from across the pond over in Oregon in America, TCAR and PCAR, so pediatric care after resuscitation and trauma care after resuscitation. Even though they're American, they do have a British base, and they've got British courses available that are specifically foundational courses for nurses, for those that are AHPs that deal with trauma care, resuscitation and pediatric care. So scan the QR code that's on your screen, or go to tcarprograms-uk.org to find out all about the courses that they have available. They're always available, they're all virtual, and you'll get a certificate sent straight to your inbox afterwards. And of course, our good friends, our long-standing friends, and probably our longest-standing friends actually over at Galen. So even though they're not here, Tim, Simon, Bronner, all our lovely friends over there, thank you so much for your support as well. Obviously, because I am non-clinical, I'm not allowed to say much about them, but if you go to galen-pharma.com, you can find out more about them and everything they have on offer for you guys. So, she says, kind of holding back tears and desperately trying not to. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening from where you are around the world. I know there's been some international audience members, there's been some national audience members. Liam, thank you so much for making my last webinar such a joy to present. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to everyone for being with us, for everyone that names that I recognise, for Jean, of course, I love you to pieces. Daniel, David, everyone that's been here every single time. Thank you so much, Jerry. Suzanne, of course, thank you everyone for making my 3.5 years presenting these webinars such an absolute joy. I would rather be doing absolutely nothing else on a Thursday evening. It's been fantastic. I've absolutely loved doing this. I'm going to miss you all absolutely dearly. So for one final time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to say, wherever you are in the world, please take care of yourselves. Please take care of your loved ones. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, and good night all.